real estate with Champions Real Estate Team here at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Ambassador Real Estate Company. My name is Mark Wehner II, team leader at Champions Real Estate Team. Joining me today is Russ Williams with Williams Mortgage. So we jump on every Wednesday, depending on what time we got going on. I got a couple, three kiddos that sometimes I'm working with and things like that. And we just started potty training, so that's a fun little fun event that we got going on in our lives. So, but it always keeps you on your toes. So. Yeah, like I said, we go on what's going on in the real estate market over the last 7 days. Quick tip here today, obviously, as we're coming into tax season, and even some of those that are self-employed, 1099s. This is where I think it's important if you're thinking of buying a house, investment properties, things to that sort. If you have a sales, you have a 1099 job, basically you're commissioned, like any real estate agent are. So if we want to go, thinking about buying investment properties this year or things of that sort, of buying a primary residence, yes, you want to maybe save on taxes and and have some expenses or put some money in retirement that will offset that income. But that's also gonna maybe hinder you on your purchasing power when you're going to buy a house. So you may get a 1099 for $150,000, and then you may have $50,000 of write-off. So you only show Uncle Sam you're making $100,000. Well, you may tell your lender, and I've had clients do this, that are kind of new to buying a house and say, well, hey, I made $150,000 last year, and the lender gives them kind of a pre-qualification. They go off of what that buyer says, oh, you made 150,000 and your credit card's here and your car payment's here and this and that. And so then they get oh, you're pre-qualified for this. Well, when they get that approval, if you get a pre-approval letter where you turn in your tax returns and those type of things, all of a sudden the lender's going, wait a minute, you told me you made $50,000 more. Your tax return's only showing 100,000, and so that can adjust your purchasing power when you're buying a house. So that's one of those things that if that is in the time frame or in the future here of you buying a house or wanting to buy an investment property or whatever it is, you need to be mindful of that and think and plan ahead. And that's why we always talk about us, getting together with a lender like Russ or myself or anyone here at Champions Real Estate Team to get a game plan, because that's something that I know for me personally, we meet with our accountant every October, and just say, hey, where are you at? Are you thinking of buying a house in 2026 or an investment property or whatever that is? Okay, well, let's don't, if you want to do that, you want to keep some more on the books and show the income, your tax obligation may be here, is that where you want to be? And so it's just a planning. And like I said, you got to have, a dugout or a coaching staff, around you, be it a CPA, financial advisor. You got to have a mortgage broker that know, like, and trust. It's going to give you that information so that they can give you a playbook and you can go out and run the plays that you want to do. And so that's a big piece of it. Obviously showing that income, when it comes to buy a house I think is a huge thing for people. And so sometimes, yes, you want to save on the taxes, but you also may want to have, a little bit more purchasing power. So one year you may pay Uncle Sam a little bit more than you really want to, but that offsets on what your home ownership goals basically are in that time frame. So I think that's just a big thing. And maybe it's a little bit later. You should have probably done some of that planning before the year if you're putting money into that, SEP IRAs or your 401ks, and those pre-tax things like that to lower those incomes down. But yeah, I don't know, Russ, you have anything you want to add on that or anything I'm missing from a lender standpoint?
One thing that that a lot of folks don't realize, and even some tax preparers don't realize, is that things like depreciation can be beneficial when it comes to qualifying for a mortgage, because we can add that back to the bottom line income. So you're in your example, Mark, if the taxable income is $100,000, even though they earned 150, if they have $10,000 worth of depreciation, whether that be Section 179 or whether it be mileage depreciation, we can add those things back to help pump the income back up.
Nice. Yeah. And then I think even if you have income coming in from rental properties, I think you can use 75% of that. Is that what that number is?
Yeah, it's 75% of the lease basically, or if there have been tax returns, we can use the income from the tax returns. And of course, if the investment property has had major renovations done, that of course hit the tax return as a loss, we can have those backed out with documentation.
Yeah. So like I said, and exactly the reason why that I necessarily don't know I have all the answers, but you surround yourself with good people that know those answers. And so like I said, when I'm working with clients and they have questions, I give Russ a call, and vice versa. He calls me sometimes for things and saying, hey, what should we do in this situation? Hey, here's some options. And that's why, like I said, you surround yourself with a coaching staff to help coach you, or advisory staff, in that sense, like, getting a CPA and saying, hey, make sure that you have these documentations, whether it's depreciation or those type of things that you can get to your lender so they can, adjust accordingly so that you can put your best foot forward if you want to. And some people say, well, I don't want to. Yes, you have that purchasing power. Maybe you don't want to go that high, which is perfectly fine. But, what are the implications of all of those type of things? So like I said, the reading rainbow, the more you know, right? All that fun stuff. And then you said the end of the thing and come over the top. But anyways, cool. Sweet. Well, if you have any questions on that, give us a holler. Happy to help. We'd love to be part of your coaching staff, your advisory table and things of that sort. So let's jump into what's gone on in the real estate market over the last 7 days here. That pop up. All right. Sweet. So we had 819 new listings go live in the last 7 days. 336 new contracts written, and about 272 happy new homeowners there with regards to that. So the big number, obviously, you can see there is 800. We haven't had that number in the 800s since basically October of last year. So that's what we're kind of seeing now is obviously some of those people, they kind of been holding off to the holidays. Boom, the weather's a little bit nicer. Hey, now's a great time to list the house. Let's get it out there. Let's get it on the market. And obviously we saw, and Russell talked about this in a few minutes, is that, our interest rates are more favorable now. We got a 5. In the first number holder there. So we're down below 6% sometimes, depending on credit score and all the variables in there. But I think that's one of those things that's going to maybe push some of those people off the sidelines. It's the first of the year. Let's buy a house. Here's my goals, and all that kind of stuff. And you get those people out there, and same thing on that, from the selling side is they want to get their house on the market because if they got to buy a new house, they want to get out there before, the rush comes up. And, so went to the dentist today, just had the normal annual checkup or whatever. And my dentist's like, well, I'm thinking about buying. I don't want to buy with rates. And this, he kind of had basically the same, what do I want to say, sentiment or what of what kind of what we're seeing is like, hey, my rate's really low, but why would I want to pay 7%, 6% on the rate, on a new house? And he's thinking of buying, like a cabin or something like that. And he's like, I don't know if I want to, so we're seeing a lot of that kind of don't really know what they want to do. But right now, and I told him, I said, if we get a 5% interest rates in that ballpark, I think that's going to get a lot of people out there. And I go, maybe that lake home, a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines like you are. And I go, and they're going to jump in there, in March, April, if rates stay where keep kind of hovering in that ballpark. And that's what's that going to do? Obviously, it's going to drive prices up. You're going to pay more, than you can get. Obviously, there's a significantly, larger amount. We had 579 new listings went live last week. So we had about 250 more, come on just in 7 days than typical, and so, that's just something I take a look at, keep your finger on the pulse in regards to that. So let's jump in and look at the 30,000 foot view. That pulls up for everybody here. So we had 3,650 new listings go live or active listings in the Omaha, Lincoln, MLS. Douglas, Sarpy County, Omaha metro area, about 2,000. About 1,000 existing homes and new construction. So we're seeing more of those come online. So as they dug the holes, in the fall, and they're getting into that framing stage, drywall stage, where maybe they can make a few selections on some of those spec homes. And it's the first time we've seen basically new construction above the existing homes in the last probably couple months. Just for that simple fact that the new construction's, just they're ready to rock and roll. So we got an inventory of 5.1. So it's kind of a neutral market. And I think sometimes too, what we might have been seeing too is now I just think about it, with those new listings that came live, you might have had some people that took their house off the market, back right before Christmas and the holidays. Say, hey, let's take the house off the market. Let's relist it in January. And so sometimes we can take a look back at those, as from a buyer's perspective, and we can see the listing history, and they may have bumped that price up a little bit. Well, we know 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, they would have sold the house for $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 less, and so you can kind of adjust accordingly and get into that house before, the surge of the buying season essentially comes up there. So average sold price over the last, basically the last 14 days is at 382. So when we closed out the end of the year last year, it was like 361, so some of those maybe new construction prices coming in, those pending units, obviously those new construction contracts. So January and February are typically one of the higher months of pending contracts and new construction, just because people want to get in, right around when school starts or before the holidays. And some of those builders are 12 months out to 9 months, 9 to 12 months, depending on the builder and such. So you're getting in there in the fall time frame before the snow flies. So that's kind of the general consensus of what's gone on in the market based off the numbers. We'll jump in here with Russ. I know we've seen, obviously, we just touched on a little bit with rates kind of coming down a little bit. and what the volatility is doing in that realm. So I guess, Russ, what are we seeing on your end, buddy?
Rates are up just a little bit in the last couple of days, but we're sitting at roughly 3-year lows for rates. And there are a lot of reasons for that, not the least of which is the jobs market has been tame, and inflation appears to be somewhat under control. Obviously, when you're going to the grocery store, you don't necessarily feel that way, but inflation is an increase in prices over time, and so a lot of the damage has already been done. The prices are where the prices are now. Having said that, and given that the Federal Reserve Bank is closely watched, they meet here in 2 weeks from today, and right now there's just a 5% chance that they'll drop that short-term rate, which would affect things like auto loans, credit cards, student loans. And typically, mortgage rates will drop in advance if it's expected that the Fed is going to drop. So right now, we've not seen a lot of movement based upon Fed projections and what the mortgage rates are. Certainly, 2 weeks is a long time. That could shift if we have economic data come out that shows some weakness. But having said that, just as you'd mentioned earlier on the new construction mark, I believe nationwide it's an 18% increase year over year on new construction starts. And significant reason for that is when rates stay low for a 2 or 3 week period of time, that starts to get optimism going among builders and buyers of new construction homes. So, having said that, looking at some of the forecast out there, whether it be NAR, whether it be the Mortgage Bankers Association, whether it be some of the major players in the real estate community, they're expecting rates are going to be right in this general range for most of the year. Um, Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball to know where they're going to be. But having said that, as these rates stay in this range, we'll see more people coming off the sideline with rates being better than what they have been. Plus, we have the spring market right around the corner. So if you're thinking about buying a house, refinancing, doing any of those things, now is the time to start the conversation with Mark and his team. Because if you wait for 30, 60, 90 days, you may see a lot more competition and we may see some upward pressure on home prices if, in fact, mortgage rates stay down at these levels.
Yep. Awesome. Well, that's kind of our rundown of what's going on in the real estate market last week. So if you have any questions, give us a holler, 672-7670 or 290-8936 for Russ. We're happy to help you. Feel free to jump on our championsrealestateteam.com website. We got our buyer guide, seller guide. Just click on the buyer seller tab. When you jump on our website, they just register on there. We're not going to bombard you with phone calls. I know a lot of agents at speed to lead and you got to call them right away. And, we want to be there to help and guide you and coach you through that process. We're not there to pester you and say, are you going to buy a house today? Are you going to buy a house today? Let's buy a house when you are ready, when the timing is right for you, and you've got all your coaches in line and your advisors in line, whatever you want to call them, so you can make the best decision for you. So feel free to give us a holler. Happy to help you. And until next week, we'll see you later.